Today's guest is not only a friend of mine, but also a very brilliant man, Dr. Johnathan Edwards, who is a board-certified anesthesiologist. He's been practicing with ketamine, actually, for the past 25 years, and only 5 or 6 of that has been therapeutic. So I didn't know that ketamine was used commonly in the anesthesia world. I didn't know that if you were put under for a surgery, you were likely experiencing ketamine. And the thought here was how ketamine can be used to prevent suicidal ideation and also be used to treat PTSD. And typically he's working with veterans, which I very much admire, as I think those are some of the most selfless people in the world, serving our country and risking their lives to ensure the mission and our safeness. So to think that those people come home, and although they didn't lose their life on the battlefield, sometimes they feel the need to take their own life at home, and that's pretty heartbreaking. So, one of the most staggering statistics for suicide is that more people have been lost via suicide than all of the wars combined here in the United States. So when you think about that, I think we've all known someone that we have lost to suicide, or that has attempted suicide, or perhaps felt suicidal tendencies ourselves. I know that in this episode, I do open up about my own experiences with depression and suicidal thoughts. And it felt really good to have that conversation with Dr. Edwards, and also share my experiences of how using ketamine myself has really helped me turn over a new leaf and look at life in a different way. So I know that there are some really powerful effects for ketamine. We also talk about the dangers of ketamine. We also talk about Matthew Perry and a little bit of the smear campaign that Dr. Edwards felt like went through ketamine, kind of blaming ketamine as the reason why, and maybe feeling like there were more questions than answers after he went through the autopsy report himself. So that's a very interesting topic. We also talk about how ketamine rewires your brain. So a lot of people who struggle with depression get in this cyclical nature where no matter how good it is in one moment, it circles back to that really dark place. And sometimes it feels like there's no escaping this cycle. But ketamine has some pretty amazing things that can be done to help create new neural pathways in your brain and help new cycles form. Dr. Edwards does have a book called The Revolutionary Ketamine that has a lot of great information, a lot of mind-blowing statistics, and you'll even see myself appear talking about my experience with ketamine in the book as well, in chapter 7, talking about does ketamine take away the eye of the tiger? Because I'll tell you what, it certainly brings a different way of looking at life. Maybe takes away a little bit of the harshness. Do we need that as athletes? Well, we'll dive into that for sure in this episode. Well, today I have the privilege of having a good friend of mine and also a very intelligent man, Dr. Johnathan Edwards. We've been friends for quite some time. We actually met, I think, through Gray Maynard.
Yep.
Yeah,
2016, I think.
Was it? I feel like it was a little earlier.
Maybe
16.
even earlier, yeah.
I think it must have been 15 at least, because I know I had been working with you for a little bit before my fight with Holly.
It was all about the camp with Holly Holmes. Yep,
yeah.
That's right.
So I think I'd met you a little, but that might have been 16 then. You might have been right. And I was working with you a little bit, and you were the one that helped me figure out that I had a thyroid issue.
Yes. Yep. We got all that done, and then, went through your camp, and it went well, and we've done great things since.
Yeah. And I didn't know why in that camp that I was having trouble getting my weight down, and I almost didn't make it. And I didn't really address it
That's right.
until the next I think it was actually, so it started with that camp, and then I still was kind of like, didn't understand. I must have just needed a diet harder. I was doing the harder, not smarter. And then I went and I fought Amanda, and it was the worst weight cut of my life. And I was like, okay, doc, something's not right.
I know.
And then you helped me. You're like, okay, well, let's look at that,
Yeah, we did a complete thyroid panel, way more than like a general practitioner. I mean, we tested there were 8 different thyroid tests and just like did the gamut. And we figured that one out in the right amount of time, and it's all good.
It's helped ever since.
Yeah.
So today, I'm really excited about this conversation because I hope that it reaches a lot of people that need to know that there is a way out from the cyclical cycle that can be a deep, dark place, living in a place of depression. And I think about Coach Follis.
Robert Follis, yeah. No, we all loved him, man. It was,
and he was such an integral part of my career. He was there. He really is a big reason why I feel like I ever won my world title with Holly Holm. He was, the mentor that I needed, the sounding board, such a good, kind person, somebody who really lit up the room when he walked in. And I know that a lot of people say that, but there was something contagious about his laugh.
Yes. No,
you remember that boisterous laugh?
I mean, I had the privilege of knowing him for about over a year before he took his life, So
and we lost him to suicide. And sometimes it's the people that you think are the strongest, or the people that in front of everybody are happy and outgoing and they make everybody laugh, but they always come back to this dark place.
Yeah. I look at Coach Follis as one of those people, like, I missed the boat. I wasn't doing ketamine. I didn't write the book yet. And I look back at all the signs and symptoms, and wow, how obvious it is to me now. And that leaves a sadness with me because, we could have helped him. I know we could have.
Yeah.
I don't know if you never know if it would have been completely successful, but I could have done something for him now, and I always look back at that and reminisce and know that next person I'm helping is Coach Follis.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
That's true.
And, I think about that, and I think that with him in my heart, and as I carry him with me to I have his water bottles, actually. That's one of the gifts that was given to me in his parting wound. That's really all that I needed, but I bring his water bottles to every single fight. He's always with me in my warm-up rooms and most of the time in my training practices and whatnot. But I think that in his passing, he would have liked it to mean something and to help others if possible. So I use him as this motivation to have this conversation with you about ketamine and what it can do for people who have suicidal ideations and people who are struggling with depression, people who are struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, veterans. And I know that you've been working for quite some time now. I mean, I think 5-6 years that you've been working with ketamine therapeutically.
Correct.
And 25
or more years
as
an anesthesiologist.
Yeah.
Yep.
So let's talk first about why is it that people get into a stuck cycle, and what it is about ketamine that actually helps you to branch out of that.
Yeah, that's the way to get into this. So in mental disorders, you have everything works by your brain. It's how we think. That's our consciousness. That's how we control our hands, our feet. So in your brain, you have this pathway called the default mode network. So that default mode network is kind of like, imagine it like a track, almost like on a dirt bike track, or whatever. That's the slot you're going to go in. Your thoughts go through that slot, which is basically a bunch of neurons together. And that default mode network can have positive, happy thoughts or useful thoughts or things like, that people who don't have depression and suicidal ideations don't have. Or it can be that mode where all you think about is, why is life so bad? Why is everything so dark? Nothing works out for me. Why am I a burden? Why am I isolated? Why do I have, I can't get out of these thoughts, and it's a rut, and it's a cyclical deal to where you're stuck in the default mode network. And that's what you'll read that in the psychology books and that kind of thing. So that's the first problem. and that's what antidepressants and therapy try to do, to get you unstuck. And that's where psychologists and psychiatrists come in. But you can modify that default mode network with psychedelics such as ketamine. And ketamine is one of the drugs that helps you get out of that default mode network and increase what's called neuroplasticity, or the actual physical changings of how your neurons fire. That's the magic of psychedelics in conjunction. I always put it in conjunction with therapy. Never do I say it just happens alone. It has to be with whatever type of therapy you're getting, even if it's with your loved ones and family, So that's a 30,000-foot view of how, ketamine affects mental depression, suicidal ideations, and such.
Yeah. Are there studies and statistics out yet about the therapeutic benefits?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, they're all in my book, The Revolutionary Ketamine, and some other books I've written. It was discovered, we knew way back in the 70s. There's evidence in the 70s that it was a good antidepressant. I mean, you can just look at articles, there's a Dr. Edward Domino, and even since ketamine was even made, there were people saying, oh, it's a way better antidepressant than any other thing out there.
Than the actual antidepressants.
Antidepressants.
So antidepressants, if I'm going to put this in layman's terms, the way that I look at them is they're kind of like a numbing.
Yes.
Right? So they numb. Now, I don't see the benefit in numbing unless the numbing has like a way to get you out of where you're at. But there's got to be like an endpoint, because if you just live in numb, sometimes I think it's beneficial to hit the rock bottom if you can get out. Now, I'm not talking about chronic depression, but sometimes I believe that antidepressants, and I actually learned this from Abigail Schreier.
Yes, I've read her
Bad
books.
therapy,
Yeah.
right? So this is kind of where it got me thinking about this, is that when you take antidepressants, sometimes you're taking and robbing yourself of the opportunity to hit the low, to know you've had enough, and that it's time to turn the ship around, right?
You're so correct. So many people put people on antidepressants and they never get off, and it's not meant for that. You have to have an endpoint to those things, because who wants to go around the world with, living numb?
Yeah.
That's a big,
Do you ever see the movie Click?
I know of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't see it, but I know of it.
Basically, the synopsis of it is just, he has this remote and he can fast forward through all the times that he doesn't like. But then he's like at the end of his life before he knows it, and he doesn't really have any memories. Like, wait, I want to go back, and it doesn't work like that. And I feel like antidepressants might even, even maladaptive coping skills. I'll use myself for an example. I got, this is, a self reflection. So I haven't been formally diagnosed, but I believe that I've used disassociation as a coping skill.
Sure.
And it doesn't serve me now. It served me well when I was in bad places, when I was in bad times, when I was around people that weren't helping me, that were hindering me, and I could take myself out of that place and I could still perform as a fighter. I could still take those things and kind of just like, put them into play that seemed like beneficial. But then once I had kids and I got in a healthy relationship, and I was like, I want to be present.
Yep.
Where am I? Like, why don't I remember the things that other people remember? Why am I always kind of checked out?
Yeah, you kind of have to look at yourself. Who am I? But looking at yourself from the other room. That's a hard thing to do.
And you know what helped me with that? Mushrooms and ketamine.
Yep.
I'll tell you what. So I've had one deep experience with mushrooms, and it was life-changing before my experience with ketamine.
Yep.
And I was a very clean as a whistle up until about my 30s. I had never smoked weed. I had never done any kind of drug. I was very straight edge, very scared even to try drugs, because I just know that they can be, you just don't know where you're going to go with that. And I didn't know how I felt about it. So I completely steered clear. And then I got to a point where I had to flip it on its head, because I got to a point of where I was considering suicide. I got to a point where I thought, if I don't change something, I'm at my limit. I'm going to break. And fortunately, it was more situational than it was like a chronic depression.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was something that I knew if I could change my environment, I believed that I could get out of it. And it took a lot of self-reflection. It took a lot of work. And I remember describing this feeling. It was at the time of my retirement when I lost my last fight. And
Yep.
I had I thought that fighting would fix it because it always had before. I thought if I could just get in there and get a win, I'll get that feeling back.
Dopamine rush.
I'll get that, feed my soul. Like I'm just starving right now. I lost my world title. And then I went out there and I just was not even there in the fight. I barely remember it. I don't remember fight week. I don't remember weigh-ins. I barely remember the fight. Actually, I don't think I remember the fight. I've gone back and watched parts of the fight, and I think that's how I remember, because I watch myself and I'm like, that's like an out-of-body experience for me. And I remember that night and the weeks after, I was like, I'm getting really close and this is scaring me. And I had to look for the pinhole of light in the very dark room. And I didn't know what was on the other side of that, but I knew I had to run towards it. And as I started unfolding and unpacking everything, I realized that I needed connection. I needed to reconnect with my family, needed to reconnect because I'd isolated myself.
Yes, you did.
I had isolated myself tremendously. And I had to change the atmosphere of what I was in. There's a big reason why I walked away from fighting, because I didn't know who I was other than Misha Tate the fighter.
Right.
And I said, this isn't working anymore. I have to discover something else, or this is a very bleak outlook at this point. And so I went on a road trip. I took my little dog, the scooter.
Yep.
A little scooter. And I went on a road trip and I just put away my phone and I tried to feed my soul. I didn't know that's what I was doing at the time, but looking back on it now, I knew that. That's what I was doing. Now, did that solve everything? No, but it certainly started me on having a better relationship with myself. And then it wasn't until years after that, after I had had my kids, and the thought of psychedelics.
Yep.
My friends were doing this more, and people were having great stories of how they came out on the other side of this better. And I thought, okay, well, I'm not going to a rave and going to, eat mushrooms. This is not my intention is actually to like sit in my backyard and try to become more one with myself.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what I got out of it. Now, it was hard though, because it brought up some traumas.
Right.
It brought up some traumas.
We'll talk about that. Yep.
Yeah, it brought up some traumas, and I had to work through those traumas while being in this different state of mind. And so I cried, and I cried heavy, and I cried deep. And then I said, okay, now it's time to let go of this. So I'm going to change. I was inside at first, and then I went outside to my pool, and I just noticed everything about the outside, and in a way that I felt like I had never been connected to nature before. And not just nature, but the universe. And it's going to maybe sound strange if you haven't had this experience, but it makes you realize that we're all connected.
Yep. You're hitting everything on the head there.
And then I had, you had said, hey, I'm doing ketamine. I'm doing these treatments. I'd really like you to try one. And I said, well, let's do it. And so you came over to my house. You administered ketamine through an IV. I was sitting and watching a video of grappling. I think I was watching Gordon Ryan. I still remember the video, actually, because it's kind of, or pieces of it that I took away from that video, I feel like will always be ingrained in techniques that I use now. But then I kind of just drifted off, and I didn't feel like I was necessarily confined by the limits of my body anymore. So my personal experience was that I became an energy source. At times it felt like I was, maybe if you were to describe in a movie what they would, like for imagery purposes, like the energy moving through wires in a computer.
Yep.
I felt like I became the fabric of my couch cushion at one point. Like it was
oceanic, and there's all terms for that.
I mean, it was just such a different experience. And I remember thinking that I definitely wanted to be in this life with my family, but I was all of a sudden realizing that there were other like dimensions, if you will, is how I would have described my experience. And I'm sure it's
Mm-hmm.
different for everyone. But I started to realize that there are layers to our connection, and it kind of reaffirmed. I
Mm.
became more connected when I did deep dive with psychedelics. But then I started to understand that there are layers and depth to these connections we can have with people, with ourselves. And I think it helped me tap into my empathetic side.
Okay.
I would say that now when somebody is like having road rage, for example, so it's a great example because it happens. People are so pissed off because you didn't go right when the light turned green, and they lose their mind or,
For
whatever it is.
what? I know. Yeah.
And you just, now instead of meeting them with the head on kind of like, oh, like, oh, you're going to be mad. Well, I'm going to be mad and we're both going to be mad and we're going to escalate this anger. And this can apply obviously in your relationships and with your kids who try to push your buttons and, like all these facets
So I
of my
think,
life.
yeah, so there's a lot to unpack there. So let me start with this: the athletes, suicide, and ketamine. I wrote a whole chapter on that in the Revolutionary Ketamine, and I think that is very connected to your situation, and you're not alone. I mean, I was a team doctor for many cycling teams, and he was a good friend and writer, Johnathan Cantwell, who I write about in the book. I never would have guessed, but yeah, he took his own life, and it was kind of at the end of his career, and he's trying to find himself. And I mean, he was married with kids, happy and everything, it seemed. And he was such an outgoing individual, but same kind of thing. He got himself in a situation where he thought that's all he could do.
Yeah.
And you were kind of going down that road, in a sense, I remember
Yeah.
very clearly. And it's athletes get this, you're always getting these dopamine hits, whether it's signing the contract, winning the competition, winning the fight, having a great sparring session, getting a new sponsor, having a new relationship, having everybody going, hey, I loved what you did. It's like, those are all dopamine hits, dopamine just surges, if you will, and they mold your mind and persona and expectations in a way that happens for professional athletes. And then you throw all the social media stuff on top of that and the pressures of that.
Yeah.
And that's what Abigail Schreier's book gets into, and others like Johnathan Haidt and Dr. Twenge and all this. They all get into that, and then comes I think it's important to talk about there's been a number of UFC athletes who've had chronic traumatic encephalopathy or continuous brain trauma, like, probably what happened with Rob Follis.
Mm-hmm.
He probably had multiple brain traumas and
CTE.
Form of CTE that just finally put him in that default mode network, and and that's what ketamine can get you out of. It's the one drug we have today that's available to everyone legally in a clinic that we can give. You can just go pay for it as a medical visit. We'll get into that, but can that help professional and amateur athletes and high school athletes, for goodness sakes, who are signing, $5 million contracts before they go to college? It's crazy.
Yeah.
Anyway, but, so that, those are good times to combine psychedelics and therapy. And so you did the psychedelics, and your therapy was, your family, your new future husband. It was talking to me. It was talking,
Mm-hmm.
to reaching out to I remember your mom, and then you were, you just got deep into everything.
And I have a behavioral therapist at
Mhm.
the UFC Performance Institute, Micah,
Yes.
who is
yes.
phenomenal.
I remember. Yeah.
And I would say, to add to this, I don't think that all therapies are equal if you're seeking professional therapy.
Mm.
I am now not a big believer in talk therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people, I think, don't know that there's a difference between therapists. So I would encourage, if you're going to therapy or if you're going to send someone or kids, just inquire what kind of therapy. Do a little bit of research. What's your background? What's your
homework.
approach?
Yeah.
Because when we sit and just talk about our problems, sometimes we re-traumatize, oftentimes re-traumatize, and we ruminate. So although it feels good sometimes to get that out there, I do think that's important, but not over and over and over and over and over again. So if you're going to your therapist for a year or two and they're not giving you tools for how to get you to the other side of that, they're just making money off
Yeah,
of you.
they should be putting you in situations that you're kind of afraid of. And it's like, if you're afraid of the elevator, then, and you won't even get near an elevator. Well, the first step is like, hey, let's just go to a building where an elevator is.
Right.
Let's create that
They're
emotion.
moving you through it as
and then we're
opposed
going to
to
move you
saying,
through it as a
well,
point.
what is it about the elevator? Well,
Right,
tell me
right.
about the elevator. Well, let's talk about the elevator. Well, now we're just focusing on the elevator. Like,
Yeah, that's
how do
true.
we actually get
Yeah.
to the other side?
Yeah, I've become a pretty good psychologist through all this. I mean, I've listened to dozens and dozens of people and studied it as well. And and I work with Dr. Sam Zand. He's a psychiatrist in town he's worked with Darren Waller. He's worked with many top athletes. And anyway, I've learned, he's trained me a lot, and I've learned a ton from him about what real therapy entails. And I mean, wow. And he also, and I've taught him how to do ketamine, as far as in his clinic. So it was, so we've helped each other, and that's how I've gotten. People ask, how'd you get so far in this? Well, that's, I've had help and I've helped others. And, it's just,
that's how we're here.
That's why we're here, helping each other, right?
It's synergy.
So I do want to make sure we cover. So do you think after doing the psychedelics and all that thing, do you think it takes away the eye of the tiger for a professional athlete, or now looking back, does it not, or does it help the PTSD? Can you be that raging successful athlete after a psychedelic experience, or even maybe even therapy counts as this? I don't know. This is kind of your wheelhouse, but
I'm so glad that you asked that, because I remember after my first psychedelic experience and then my second, I started to question, because the whole new part of me really started to surface. The empathetic, the kind, the loving, the nurturing, the self-loving part of me started to really flourish, which felt right.
Yeah.
It felt like it would have been nice to have this all along, to be honest, to not have had to go through the self-loathing, the adversity. Not that adversity can never serve us well. I think it does have its purpose, but I was using adversity as my reason why, and that was short-sighted.
Yeah.
That was very short-sighted. And so my question to you when we were talking about this, and I'll go back to when I was talking about the road rage and these kinds of things, how anger can escalate anger if it's met with anger. I don't really have that anymore since having these psychedelic experiences. It's not that I never reach a point of anger, but it's much more of a, okay, I realize I'm getting triggered right now and I can do something about this. And that also comes with therapy, and I would recommend a cognitive behavioral therapist. That's what I would recommend, kind of readdressing that for people who are listening, not just a talk therapist, but somebody who's going to understand how the brain works and how you can get through to the other side, give you skills and tools. So coming back, I was wondering, can athletes be top tier athletes without the trauma that drives them? Because I would venture to say 99% of the time, if not more, all the top athletes who have been world champions, who are Olympians, who are impressive, have these stories that make you go, ah. And it's like, wow. I mean, and it's so inspirational that, hey, if they can overcome, and if they can become something great, even though they had all this stuff happen to them, well, maybe I could too. But I think I would like to go down to even more of the root cause and say, but do we have to?
Yeah.
Is that necessary to get us to the best level? And my concern was, after having these experiences, like, am I too nice now?
Yep. Yeah.
Did I lose the fierceness? Did I lose, am I taking away the competitive edge? Because all I've ever known was to use my trauma as my motivator, as my propeller into my success of my career.
It served you well.
And it was in
for a
spite
long
of.
time.
And it did serve me well, and I obviously became a world champion. But now that we're sitting having this conversation and I've really had a lot of time to self-reflect, it can remove the eye of the tiger momentarily, because you've got to learn how to rebuild yourself in a way that's productive, in a
Yeah.
healthy way. And that's where I feel like I finally discovered myself in that. I lost 2 fights, and I
Yep.
just didn't really have the oomph going into those. I was kind of a little complacent, a little flat, a little mellow. And that's where I kind of thought, man, you know, did those experiences potentially take that away? But it was that, okay, so I removed some of my trauma and my why. But what do I replace it with? I'd never thought about that. How do I have the tools and the mindset to still want, like, what drives me now? And I had to sit back and think, what is it that I want? I always used to tell myself, well, I want to win, right? I mean, it seems logical, right?
Yeah.
I'm doing a competition, I want to win. That's no longer the answer, though, to myself. Now my answer is like, I don't actually care about winning anymore. Well, I mean, of course I care.
It's going to come. Yeah.
But I want to be the best.
Mhm.
And I've realized that being your best and winning are not always linear.
Yeah. So a winning mindset isn't just wanting an endpoint. It's actually directing a bunch of chaotic energy in things that you can't control. You know, like if
Yes.
I go back to like Jordan Peterson's word, what kind of person do you want? You know, our man, let's say a male. You don't want a man who's not masculine and can't stand. You want a dangerous man who can control his emotions.
Yes.
And that's I bring that up, you know, because that's what you want in a fighter or an athlete. You want them to be a dangerous person in a sense, but they can control those chaoses to the end result of
Yes.
being the best. I mean, that you know.
And then I don't think
Yeah.
I was, that's such a great point. I wasn't controlling any of that. And that's why sometimes it flipped me right on my head. There were plenty of times when I think I could have done much better. And even when I won, a lot of times, sometimes I won by marginal.
Yeah.
And when I could have dominated because I was too afraid to not win. I wasn't seeking to be my best. I was seeking just to win. And that meant if I just keep riding this wave and I don't change anything else about this, I should win, then that's what I would do. And I wouldn't necessarily find my best because I wouldn't take the risk because I hadn't made that my priority.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'll tell you what, in my last fight, my priority wasn't winning. Of course, it was still the objective. It's what I wanted.
Yeah.
But I didn't want it more than I wanted to find out the best version of myself, because I don't know how much longer I'm going to do this for. I know I can win. I also know I can lose.
Yeah.
But have I found the best Misha Tate yet? That's the question.
That's what's driving. Well, and that's what's driving you right now. It has to be.
In my last
You know?
performance,
Yeah.
all of those things married themselves in a way that felt really whole, really productive, and really good. And I went out there with simple objectives. I will take her down. And I was like, you know what? Even if I don't win this fight, that will happen. I was like, I will not back down on that. And I'm going to be my best. I'm going to take all the risks. I'm going to take all the opportunities. I will not give an inch. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to seek to find my best.
Yep.
That was my objective. And you know what happened? I won. Because when I am my best, I'm more likely to win.
Yep.
But if I seek winning, oftentimes I'm holding myself back from being my best, which may actually result in a loss. So total change of mindset. And I don't know if I would have found the true depth and comfortability in my soul, in my being, in my purpose, had it not been tied into the psychedelics, and then also with the behavioral cognitive therapist, and all of those things helping me to discover.
Well, that's
my
going to be
meaning
in
and
the
purpose.
next edition of my book. So I'm going to change my chapter 7. I write all about athletes and psychedelics and ketamine, and you're in it, and you have an entire page dedicated to our discussion on this subject. And now I have more to expand on it, because you know you've completely blown the doors off of everything we spoke about, and now you know I just think that any athlete's going to come to this and hopefully understand a little more psychology of winning. really. And not just that, being the best person that you can be. And that's the best thing in the world. Like, if you can be the best you can be, you're going to be attractive to anybody.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing to tell young people now. It's like, that's the goal. It doesn't matter who you are, athlete or not, just being that best version of who you can be will make a lot of things in life go the way you want.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's so true. And I want to pick your brain a little bit more because although I've been sharing a lot of my stories and I love our conversations, we always have great conversations.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
are such a wealth of knowledge on the topic. And I would be remiss of me not to address, are there negatives about ketamine and also, the death of Matthew Perry? Right? It happened in October 2023. I know you have some things to say about this. We've had some conversations, but it really did put a little bit of a smear campaign on ketamine. And it is a street drug.
I'll tell you the media in general, they're motivated to smear ketamine. Why? So let's go back to, it was originally made for anesthetics and a little bit of the history of it. Then it became a party drug. And that's where it got its really bad name. Although it was still used, it's still the most used anesthetic in the world because you don't need oxygen, you don't need pain medications. You can do surgery just on ketamine in the wilderness if you had to. And so there it is. It became a buddy drug in Vietnam. And
is that you like using ketamine to a point of
yeah,
say
surgery.
unconsciousness?
It's a big dose. Yeah,
it's a big dose. So
but it doesn't stop your breathing. So it's a safe, and this is what we'll get to. It's a safe drug in the sense it actually stimulates your breathing. It can increase your heart rate and all that kind of stuff, but not that much. And even in the doses we use in anesthesia, So
is ketamine always used in anesthesia?
There was a time it was the main drug in anesthesia. Yeah, for a good minute until propofol came out.
Does it cause nausea?
All of them do. Yeah.
Ketamine
especially
as well?
at high doses. Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Not everybody, but it's a typical anesthetic, and surgery has that as well. I've had about I'd say about 1 or 2 out of every 10 people might have a little nausea, with therapeutic ketamine for mental, in clinics. So that's my experience.
How often would you say ketamine is used in the surgery setting or something where someone's going under versus
Well,
not?
in pediatrics, it's still used thousands of times per day. It's a very safe drug in pediatrics. We give it in the ER to set bones and to do multitudes of things. And now we're even considering it for suicidal ideation, like where, hey, somebody comes with suicidal ideation in the emergency room. There's good studies out there showing that it works in the emergency room to stop suicidal ideations. And then guess what? You don't have to Baker Act or put that person in a mental institution for some days. And you can actually send them home with family with an outpatient psychiatry consultation.
Right.
Not everybody, but there's a good portion of people that works for. So that's one of the hopes for getting ketamine in the mainstream for mental, because it's so ubiquitous, utilized in anesthesia and emergency room medicine, that we know it's a safe drug and it's cheap too. And but getting back to some of the negative things. So then it became the difference between street ketamine and therapeutic pharmaceutical grade ketamine is 2 different animals. Street ketamine is off the street. It's laced with fentanyl. It's the reason, that's the reason it has a bad name and many adverse side effects.
Well, and of course, there's all the crazy videos of people like walking, been bent over, like
that is street ketamine.
Okay.
So now you get in the studies of the Ketamine Clinic, for example, did a study. Dave Feifel did, and he's been on TV, all that kind of stuff, of over 6,000 patients. And I think he counted 6 or 7 who actually became addicted to ketamine in a clinic scenario because it's controlled, It's not street ketamine. It's just a different administration, and it's a different experience altogether. I think the That's what I try to educate people most on. There's just two big differences. So let's get to Matthew Perry. So Matthew Perry's, he's a lifelong addict, and he's been doing ketamine. To my sources, I know he'd been doing ketamine at least for 5 to 6 years, a lot. And he
like clinically
in a clinic. Yep.
Okay, so
in Los Angeles. So he'd go for, I don't know if it was like monthly ketamine sessions, but he always thought it was like a close kiss of death without having to die, and he'd rather have the effects of ketamine than the
that
shovel.
almost sounds like an addiction in itself, though, because in my experience, I don't feel like you need it that often. But of course, maybe I'm not in a place where
that's a good
Matthew Perry is. But I feel like it's such a.
I don't know how often he did it, to be honest. I just know he'd been doing it for that long.
Okay.
But you got to realize he was also addicted to pain pills. He was on buprenorphine, which is Suboxone. Right. And he was on benzodiazepines like Xanax.
And I know somebody personally who I feel like has abused ketamine, who has a prescription, and I believe it is. Can you insert this in your anus? Is that a way? Okay.
Yeah.
Because
called a rectal administration of ketamine. Yes.
Right. So she was prescribed this. And actually,
really?
Travels with. Yeah, so I again don't know how that works or how you typically prescribe it or can't. I mean, would you do that? Would you leave it in the hands of someone else to administer? Is it safe enough?
I work with the psychiatrist and always make sure they have therapy with it. So the people I do work with who have oral ketamine is pretty limited. I do the IV infusions and how to do it in a clinic. I do it kind of like how. Guys like John Crystal, Dave Feifel, all those guys have developed these protocols, and you just stick to that. And
okay, so this is not something that you're going to be writing scripts for people to insert in their.
No, I mean, in radiation, there's some instances where you do that, like people who've had like pouchitis from, Crohn's disease, and they've had their colons removed. Yeah, I mean. Rectal administration of ketamine can help that kind of stuff because it does help in pain control.
Okay.
So the other thing that most people don't know about is ketamine can help in neuropathic pain. And I've actually had a nurse where she was going to commit suicide because her foot was constantly in pain, called complex regional pain syndrome. And you talk about something, or trigeminal neuralgia. I have many cases where nurses and other medical people and the like have actually the thing that saved them was ketamine. So ketamine actually has an effect on chronic pain.
So yes, that's so interesting. I have a physical therapist, Dr. Zaki, who I feel like physical therapy doesn't do him justice. I'm like, you got to create your own name, like a functional physical therapist or something, because the way that he breaks down physical therapy to me is the way that your brain communicates with the rest of your body.
Sure.
And how pain a lot of times can be your remembering of it, not even necessarily always the nerves themselves sending it from the pain area. Well, sometimes it's like it's here. And he has a way to help rewire the connection sometimes through movement and stimulus and these different things that he does. But that's just touching a little bit what you're saying. My own little experience with that. I thought I was going to need surgery on my ankle. I was rolling it constantly. I had surgery scheduled. If it wasn't for him, I would have a surgery scar right now and have gotten surgery. I have no problem with my ankle now. It was all a neurological connection that my brain and ankle had a failing signal to each other. So
imagine being in pain, like whether it's from Coach Follis's pain of CTE, or imagine being anxious all the time, like from, I don't know, whatever it is, needles, bees, I don't know, a car, or, meeting Misha Tate. Just to put some comedy in there. Whatever it is, imagine being able to take a medication like ketamine, and I don't care what it is. It's a rape or death, or that's why Army veterans respond to it. But a ketamine session puts you in your own mind, and you're able to look at those things that trigger you so bad face to face in a calm manner. That's what ketamine does.
Yes.
That's
in a way where you have control.
You have control.
Yeah, that's what's so interesting about it, is like, or at least it's not intimidating in the way that it is when our conscious mind is overriding.
And for some people, that's the only time in their existence that they have that experience, and that's what starts the healing path, if you will.
Yeah. Well, a lot of
Um,
times I think we
yeah,
become experts at not being alone with ourselves.
right.
Not dealing with it, putting it away,
Right,
stuffing
and
it
then you
away.
go back to what are your foundations? Who are you? That kind of thing, and we. I still want to get back to the Matthew Perry thing,
Yes,
but
we'll get there.
one thing I want to say is ketamine isn't for everybody. Like we discussed earlier, before on our way here, the ketamine, it's for some people. Therapy, you should always start with your family, start with therapy, start with loved ones.
Yeah.
Try to,
The right kind of therapy.
well, yeah, I think it's all right therapy. Whether you need
If it feels right, then I
medications or
think,
not,
right.
but I think you can the point is I think you can get through a lot of things that you don't think you can get through otherwise with good, solid people around you. And it just, like you've built your team, around you. That's your rock. And the better you do that, the better things are going to bounce off you.
Yeah.
It's always the case. And it's easier said than done.
So we'll get back to Matthew Perry, but let me ask then, is ketamine itself addicting? Does it have addicting properties?
Yes,
Okay.
it can be. There's definitely a population out there that, like I said, mostly with the street ketamine, because they take it in huge amounts, like grams, and we're giving it in what's called milligrams, 1,000 times less. In even in anesthesia, we give it less. So, but now that I'm talking about milligrams, so Matthew Perry had general anesthetic levels of ketamine in his system when he died. So. And what's interesting about Perry's case is I read the coroner report and I dissected it word for word in my Substack article on him, which was very popular. It kind of got me known on Substack a bit. And the coroner did not find puncture wounds. He didn't look for intramuscular injections. He didn't look for like the levels he had would have almost had to have been injected, or man, he would have had to try with intranasal ketamine and oral ketamine. I mean, to get those levels is almost mysterious. And why did he have 3,000 plus what we call nanograms per ml in his system at the time of his death? And even so, he'd just gotten back from 2 hours of pickleball. We knew he was a setup for a heart attack because he had a big atherosclerosis plaque in his LAD, which is the widowmaker, and that was growing and obvious
You say
on
widowmaker,
autopsy.
the like high death rate. Is
The
that what
one
you mean
that
by
kills
that?
you right away. Yeah,
Okay.
you have a widowmaker coronary artery and that kind of heart attack. Those are the kind of people who fall dead and
Okay.
have no chance.
Right.
Then and then he was in a shallow jacuzzi, and I'm not sure, but I mean, I don't care how high or whatever high your level is on ketamine. Was he on other things? Like, apparently not. But as soon as you feel like you're choking or dying, what happens when you almost drown? Like, your senses come about you, your sympathetic system runs up, and I mean, you can wake up from anything and almost, and it seemed he would have popped his head up and breathed. But
doesn't ketamine mess with your vestibular system? Maybe
yeah,
he went the wrong way. Maybe he was trying to.
Maybe he went the wrong way. In a pool, I could believe it, but in a 3-foot jacuzzi or
But you know how people like walk backwards, like upside. I mean, they you've seen
absolutely.
that like on the street
and
drugs.
we'll never answer that question. That's an unanswerable question of what actually happened. I'm just, but
saying that
I think there's more to his
there's-
death than just the ketamine, because my problem with it was that the media just wanted to say, oh, it was the ketamine, it was the ketamine, it was the ketamine. There was other things going in there, and then I have other sources who kind of let me on that there was other things going on with him, and like his heart disease, and then the other big mystery is that the latest article that came on is that the Los Angeles Police Department and the DEA are now trying to create a criminal investigation, because guess what? The coroner report, all ketamine paraphernalia, meaning intranasal needles, vials, oral forms of ketamine were all taken off premises before the police arrived. The only thing that was found was his Suboxone, his benzodiazepines, and other medications that he takes normally. Everything associated with ketamine was taken away off his house, and then the police arrived. So what, what really happened?
Did they say that there was any like marks on him?
No, that's
like
what I'm saying. You can read the coroner's report, and they even say it. No extraneous marks of intramuscular or intravenous forms of administering ketamine were present. Okay, then again, tell me, how did the levels get so high?
What about how could they have gotten that high if he had inserted it like rectally?
No.
No.
It's only absorbed like 20%.
Okay.
Yeah, orals only absorb like 25%.
So
it's
he would have had to really try.
Exactly.
Really put some effort in.
And so then I come to, that's why I bring in the conclusion, like, I hate to say it, was he trying to take his own life? What was this about? Because obviously he had experience with the drug. And
were there other drugs in his system?
Just a Suboxone, which is the opioid antagonist to keep you from taking like fentanyl and OxyContin. You take that so you don't want to take those things, which he has been on. But they said that wasn't in his system, and then he had some Xanax in his system. So anyway, I think the whole thing was not very clear. It doesn't have to be, but, I just had a problem with the media smearing ketamine for that reason. When, if you really understand the physiology of it, it doesn't, it doesn't do that. And then they were trying to say, oh, the ketamine caused a heart attack. Well,
at what level of ketamine in the blood would you start to have severe vestibular?
Much less than that.
Much less than that.
Yeah.
But do you build a tolerance to this as well?
Yes.
Okay, so it's another thing. It's like,
and he had a ketamine treatment just 2 weeks before that. So it's a problematic. That's why I named.
There's still a lot of questions.
That's why I tied it. Why Matthew Perry's death was problematic, and that's the title of my whole article. And let's just, what the saddest part is Matthew Perry was such a huge advocate for addiction. He spent millions of his own money making foundations to help people get off of addiction, and he must have helped countless amounts of people, and now all that is probably gone. Maybe it's still there. I don't know. But that's, we can discuss Matthew Perry and his case all day, but at the end of the day, it's just sad because a big advocate for addiction and living well are gone because he's not here.
Right.
Ugh, and that's what I write. And it does. It's like, it's not, looking for just publicity to do all this. I just thought the coroner's report was very fishy, and they're known, and the Los Angeles coroners are known to be fishy. They're not very well paid. They get, I have good. I've heard of medical colleagues say, yeah, it's not the most complete and thorough coroner's office you will find, and a lot of it's paid for just tax dollars. So it's like, anyway, but that's the Matthew Perry case. It's all on my Substack if you want to read about it. And I think at the end, it is an addictive substance to some people, especially on the street side, and that. Yes.
Have you dealt with anybody that you've treated wanting to come back to chronically get more treatments, like I think of comparing this to the opioid crisis or something. When you say it's addictive and you say it's addictive for some people, I guess I just want a clarification. For me, neither one of my experiences was something that I felt like I wanted to have on a regular basis.
Right,
because they're really kind of powerful in how they move you and their work.
Well, let's bring up Elon Musk. Elon Musk takes ketamine on semi-regular basis. He takes it because he's, a bit on the autistic, spectrum, if you will, but he thinks, it helps him help him with that part of his
Would this be
psyche.
considered microdosing, or are you talking about bigger
There's no
experiences?
such thing as microdosing ketamine.
Okay, well that's a term that's thrown around with
I know,
with psychedelics and mushrooms and
yeah, you can, psilocybin microdosing, yeah, but the dosing of ketamine, you got to take a pretty good dose to even have it do anything. But my point is there's a lot of CEOs like that who just need resets. And I mean, these people are
that's a great way to put it, a reset.
so they do it for a reset. So let's say somebody does it once a month for that. Are they an addict? I don't know. I don't think so. If they started asking me every week, hey, can I have this? I need this every week because I can't function otherwise without it. Yeah, that's starting to move into the spectrum of maybe addiction for sure. So I think there's a fine line that's not well defined, and it depends on the person of the answer you're going to get.
Right. But in your clinical practices, I don't do
people. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I don't have people who come. Oh, I need this every month, hell or high water. Otherwise I'm just not going to be able to get through life. No, I don't have
And they
that.
don't come asking more and more and more. Okay, well, that's
not myself, but I do know that exists.
Right. Okay. I was just curious if this was, because I think it's important to address both sides and be completely honest. And ketamine's not going to be for everyone. It can be addictive. I think that you should, if you're going to try it, definitely be in a safe clinical.
Well, I got to, here's the
scenario.
best answer. I actually got to ask Jordan Peterson personally about this because he had a really bad time with ketamine, and he said he described it as 2 days of hell in his book. And so he had a bad negative experience. He says, oh yeah, my doctor told me to do it. It was when he was coming off benzodiazepines, and that is the wrong time to be doing it when you're coming off another drug in a sense, or in most cases. And
why would that be?
Because you're withdrawing from other drugs.
So you're in a negative state.
If you're acutely withdrawing and you're in a negative state, and you're not really ready for it. You're not ready because it's supposed to be an experience that frees you from some of the default, like I said, the default mode pathological thinking that's plaguing you.
But potentially if you're going through a withdrawal and your brain is kind of in this negative where it's temporary, but then you're forming neural pathways that are intensifying that, maybe potentially.
Possibly, who knows?
I'm being a little hypothetical here.
I mean, there's other things you got to consider too, but in his case, and so he's in my book, and I wrote all that, and then I had the serendipity of being in one of his question and answer.
Did you ask him about
thing,
it?
And I looked at him and I said, Dr. Peterson, what do you think about using ketamine in a clinic to treat suicidality and depression and other mental disorders? And he just took a big breath and he looked at it and he goes, well, I've read the literature and I've kind of kept up on it. And yes, it has amazing utility in stopping suicide and other forms of depression. And it's a ever-growing mode of treatment along with other things. And, and then he emphasized, and I emphasized, that always doing it with therapy is the right way to do it. And so his tune kind of changed on it, but it was crazy writing about it in my book and then being right in front of him, looking him in the eye as he's telling me all this. And then, those kind of, it was a powerful experience. Yeah.
That makes so much sense to have focus and directive when you're going to go through an experience like ketamine or psychedelics, because again, if we just leave the neuroplasticity, if we leave change to chance, we don't always know what we're going to get. If we have a directive or a plan, I think, or even a thought, what you kind of want out of this moment, if you're ready for change, if you're ready for healing, it'll present itself.
Yep.
And you may not even know that that's what was still bothering you. That was my experience.
It's like any hypothesis. It's like anything you want. You have to have your brain open to manifest the idea.
Right.
The ideas will manifest it's just ask and you shall receive, right?
Yeah.
But asking isn't good enough. You have to want it. You have to like be open to the hypothesis. You have to, you got to do things, surround yourself with people who are going to give you the answers. And, in a sense, where does an answer come from?
Within.
That's a whole nother discussion.
I think it comes from within. It's like you
or without, or from
yeah.
somewhere else.
Yes, but
right?
somewhere else is also within. Once
Exactly.
you have this experience, then you're just like, wait, where is there even a difference? Oh man, that's so true.
Yeah.
Well, in your book, you describe like the 4 key experiences
Yeah.
of ketamine. Can you kind of go through those, like, and itemize them out and kind of
Yeah,
explain?
a ketamine experience in general, it washes away your ego. So you go into an experience, without being standoffish. Ego is when you're, you I don't know, I'll use the example, you go meet somebody who you've wanted to meet for a long time, but you're not yourself. So imagine losing that part of yourself that forces you to withhold your true wishes, in a sense.
Yep.
Washing away your egos. You also get this oceanic feeling, this feeling of like certain colors that you can't describe, like, that underwater experience, if you will, of just complete calmness and thing. It washes away your idea of time. You could think you're in the experience for hours, yet you're only in there for 30 to 45 minutes. Yet you could live a lifetime in one experience.
Mm-hmm. It's
So
pretty
that,
powerful stuff.
Yep.
So what are the 4? List the 4.
So that's a loss of ego, loss of time, oceanic feeling, and I mean it all. And then you got the default mode networks, the default mode network things, and yeah. Honestly, I'm trying to remember the 4th exact one I wrote, but I mean, it all goes with seeing beings and outer conscious, aliens, if you will, or just sources that may be trying to talk to you, and you might be trying to talk to them. So we call those.
People are gonna be like, "What? I'm gonna see aliens?"
Yeah, so we call those alien encounters, in a sense, and that's another part of a commonly described psychedelic.
That's interesting. I think
Yeah.
breaking down my experience, I do feel like there was other energies at work, not just myself. And I guess that's where I started to feel like it will be interesting to say this, but my level of empathy went up for other people because I feel like I am a part of those other people.
Yep, you are a very small part of the whole universal energy, and that's what it helps you. It really helps you realize that, and that. And I did, when I did a ketamine treatment in a clinic once, and then, kind of when I was getting into this, and the thing I remember coming out of it, I definitely saw my mom and dad, who were both, passed away, and very traumatically, 9/11, I lost my mom to a heart attack, and then that was a crazy day, and, and I've had many other traumas growing up, growing up in a gang-rented town, and anyway.
Yeah.
But
Well, haven't we all, though? I mean, I feel like if you've
Yeah.
ever read any of Dr. Gabor Mate's books, I think you're a fan of his. I mean, you understand that
Yeah, I
trauma
wrote about
is,
him in my book. Yeah.
trauma is such a big part of, unfortunately, like culturally, it's
Well,
very embedded.
Well, it makes you hard in it, but it also, causes pathology and stuff, I
Yeah.
mean, we held up by guns and stuff. Oh my
Now
God.
I look at
Yeah.
the body in a different way, that a lot of times what our symptoms that we experience are, I'll use eczema in my example because I've had eczema. And I was also in a relationship that was it was mentally and emotionally abusive.
Yep.
And I was not okay a lot. I was living in a very stressed environment, even within myself. I think even just feeling like I couldn't escape the environment. And I had pretty chronic flare-ups of eczema. I would get it real bad on the inside of my wrist here. I'd get it on the tops of my hands. And since I removed myself from that situation, I've never taken anything for it, and I've never had
It
to.
just shows you how much of it's in your brain, you know?
It is. Well, and
Yeah.
we're all interconnected, the mindset, the emotional,
Yep.
where we're at, and our body a lot of times is trying to tell us things that how the internal and how we're interpreting our world and our environment, how the hormones are changing through our body based on how we are interpreting that can
Yep.
manifest into physical symptoms because they're all almost the
100%.
same,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
I mean, that's what overtraining is too, you know? It's like, yeah, what I was going to say is to that point, you know, one thing I got out of the whole ordeal afterwards is that a sense of everything was going to be okay. Even if I left this world, my wife and my daughter were going to be good. You can't explain why. You just know it is. Um, you know, so that helps why you can get rid of things like your eczema, you know, or you can get rid of other pains. You can get rid of, you know,
Like acid reflux, things
acid
like
reflux.
that. Yeah, I feel
Exactly.
like that's a
You
big
know,
one.
so
That's
it just helps you know everything's okay, and you can build on that, and so that's part of the power of it, you know, and that's kind of getting into the weeds of how it works. You know, I think
why did you start doing this? I mean, what were there some statistics that caught your eye? I mean,
so. Yeah,
perhaps we should have led with this, but
Yeah, I mean,
but
this
you
is
know
how I
what?
started
And
I did a speak event talk, which is a break off of TED Talks in New York, and it's on YouTube. You can look it up. But yeah, I start off that talk with, I was 7 years old, and my mom and dad said, we're going over to grandma and grandpa's house, and I had no idea why. And all I remember is I went to that house and I saw everybody crying. I couldn't, it's like, whoa. My grandma was just in tears, and then I saw my dad start crying, my mom start crying, and then I saw the blood stain on the couch. Then I saw the body bag in the room, and then at 7 years old, I'm trying to take this all in, and I just realized that. And then they told me Grandpa's gone. So that was my first exposure to suicide. My grandfather took his life days after he was put on oxygen, and you know, and other things happened. But to get to the point, I had a very early exposure and interest in suicide. I've always had it. And I always remember going through every day I've thought about it, you know. And then I went through medical school, seeing there wasn't much you could do for suicide. Just people would just kill themselves, and you're like, why? Um, and and then so it always was. I almost went into psychiatry, you know, like really close, and then finally I ended up in anesthesiology, and then I started working with a gentleman named Gavin DeBecker. He wrote The Gift of Fear, which has sold millions of copies, and
I have
he
it on my Audible.
Yep, and
It's good.
he works, you know, he works with people like Bezos, Musk. He's like the elite. I mean, he's the Secret Service for RFK right now, Robert F. Kennedy right now, Jr. So, you know, he's a big figure in the world. He's been on Tucker Carlson, he's been on Joe Rogan, like you have, and he asked me one day, Jonathan, he goes, I was helping him with some medical matters, and just long story short, what do you think about ketamine? I was like, oh, that's kind of a softball, so, you know, like pitching a softball to an anesthesiologist. Of course I know about this. It's like it's a drug used every day in anesthesia and this and that. And I said, but then I said at the end, I go, but I also know, and I was up on the literature, that it's used for depression, suicide, and on treating other mental disorders. And if you know Gavin's personality at all, his answer was, good. I'm glad you answered it that way, Jonathan, but I just want to let you know right here and now that I was prepared if you had answered the other way. Because he's a big advocate of ketamine for some of the same reasons I am. He lost his mother tragically to suicide at 10 years old. She was a heroin addict, and he actually provides ketamine he actually helps a women's battered clinic shelter. And so he knows the power of it. And so by asking me out of the blue, and then he followed it up with, he goes, well, the book needs to be written, you know, about all this. There's no books on it. in this sense. And he goes, if you write the book, I'll write the forward. And you're like, wow, you know, what kind of offer? You know, you don't get that offer from a multi-million bestseller who's been on Oprah 6 times, you know, who's going to help you with this book. And I just was like, man, I cannot turn this down. And so that was my foray, if you will, into ketamine. And then, you know, I'd already been using it a little bit for mental, you know, I was just getting into it. And, but he solidified my position and my motivation. And he's a big reason why I'm here and why I wrote the book. And, you know, it's thanks, you know, a lot of it's thanks to him, but, you know, we've saved lives and yeah, a lot of lives.
That's gotta feel good to say.
Yeah, it feels great to say. Yeah.
That's amazing, because I know there's some pretty staggering statistics out there about people.
50,000 suicides in the last each year since the last 3 years. More than ever since World War II, for example.
And I believe I read a statistic, if I'm correct, that we have lost more people to suicide than all of the wars combined.
Yep. If you were
people choosing to take their own life because they feel like there's no other way.
Right.
And ketamine can be potentially, and you've seen it, you've witnessed it, the other way.
Yep. And I just, I mean, just the other day I had a gentleman with, you know, he had prostate cancer, and long story short, you know, they cut his hormones, and he's just a very spiritual guy. And he was suicidal. I mean, he was really going to do it. And his doctor said, you need to get ketamine. And I just happened to be the clinic he came to. And he got it. And in front of my eyes, you know, the next day I checked on him, did a post-op consult on him, post-ketamine consult, and he was good. I mean, and he's been fine, and now he's gotten the right therapy, and he's on the right track. One treatment did it for him. You know, so it's hard to argue when you see it work that well in front of you. You know, all this, there's so many studies supporting it. You know, the best one study I really want to highlight, I've met, she's a great person named Lori Calabrese, and she's a psychiatrist out of Connecticut, did a study on 300 suicidal ideation patients, all infusions. She did 3 infusions plus therapy. Over 84% stopped all suicidal ideations. Not one person checked themselves in the hospital for over a year or 2, I believe, and did not take their life.
Wow.
Think about that. You know, Did
any of the other 16% take their life?
Mm-mm.
No. So
they had suicidal ideations, but there's a big difference. You know, they did not go through with the act.
Okay.
Yeah.
So 16% of them still experienced some ideation.
Yeah.
But did not.
Yeah, and it just shows it's not perfect.
Of course,
you know, but man, it's
and not all therapy is the same, and not all people are the same, and you know. But I guess what I really want to get out to the listeners today is that it's an option. And when you feel, or somebody around you that's a loved one that you're concerned about feels like they're out of options, it's a really scary place to be.
Yep.
I've been very close to that.
Yep.
I would say it 2 times in my life, and I only talked about one of them. So maybe when we do our second podcast, I'm sure we'll do a follow-up.
Yep.
I can tell you about the first time. But I don't think it's an uncommon feeling for people to feel at loss or hopeless or frustrated. But I think the people that are going through the cycle where they feel like they can't break it, and no matter how good it gets, maybe I'll use Twitch, for example. I didn't know him personally, but I've also been in a situation where I feel like I could empathize in that sometimes people look at you and they think you've got it all. And you start to look at yourself. And the more famous that you get, you know, and I'm not A-list famous, but I've tasted a bit of what fame is like. And so many people envy your life and they think that you've got it all and you've got it all figured out. You've got the family and you've got the white picket fence and you've got the car and you've got the money and you've got the fame and you've got the success. And they think that it's just all perfect. And so you start to look at yourself and say, why don't I feel all perfect? If I've got it all, if it doesn't really get better than this and I still feel like this, it's hopeless.
Yeah.
There's nothing that will make me feel better. And
Yeah.
I think that's where a lot of times celebrities get crushed. Famous people, athletes, they think, man, I've done it all. I've got it all and nothing is fixing it. And I think that's where people who appearingly have the loving family they got, I'm sure, a lot of things that they appreciate. But those things don't necessarily remove the darkness and the trauma and the soul-sucking darkness that you feel like you always come back to. And I think what's really amazing about ketamine is the fact that it can create new neural pathways to help your brain grow in new directions that it may not have been able to do. And you weren't able to break the cycle no matter how great your life was, no matter how much you love your wife or your husband or your kids. And I think that suicide is honestly an act of selflessness, because I think that these people feel so broken that they don't want to burden anyone else with their brokenness.
Yep.
They don't think that anyone could fix them if they haven't been able to fix themselves. And so they'd rather remove themselves from the situation than burden others with the darkness that's consuming them. And so I want people to know that there is an option out there, and that ketamine could potentially, and it has, saved many lives. So I guess in closing.
Yep, that's awesome. Well said.
Thank you. And would you please list the name of both of your books, because you have 2 out about ketamine?
Yep. The first one I wrote was Suicide, COVID-19, and Ketamine. It was a dark book. It kind of like highlighted the 18 school-age suicides we had during the pandemic right here in Las Vegas, actually. So it's a hard book to read. But it exposed some of the harms of the lockdowns and things like that.
Isolation is a big part
isolation, being a burden, hopelessness, in a place of extreme vulnerability. Those are the 4 horsemen of wanting to take your own life. And anyway, and the latest book is The Revolutionary Ketamine, published by Simon & Schuster, subsidiary of Tony Lyons and Skyhorse. And that's available where books are sold. Can also find it on my website. And yeah, it's doing well. It's saving lives, and it's out there, and go read it.
I would say read it. It'll change your life. And I hope that this podcast has made a difference in someone's life. I know that these experiences, it felt like lifting a weight to be able to share those today. And we've always had great conversations, so this is just one of many for Dr. Edwards and myself. But for the listeners, I hope that it made a difference, because I think we all know somebody that might just need an option. So I'll leave you guys with that. Thanks.
Thank you.